It was a typical Saturday afternoon at Oakwood Plaza Mall, a shopping center in Lexington, Kentucky. Families strolled, children squirmed from their parents' hands, and the scent of pretzels and cinnamon filled the air. For most, it was a normal day, until someone extraordinary walked in. A man wearing a black shirt and jeans walked through the automatic doors near the food court. His face, incredibly familiar, drew quick, curious glances. He wore sunglasses and, most notably, a bright red hat that stood in stark contrast to the otherwise clean surroundings of the mall. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was that Elon Musk? A teenager sitting near the fountain stepped away, his phone already poised to take a picture. It can't be, his friend muttered, though he was already recording too. Why would he be here? Within minutes, onlookers began to gather discreetly. Their conversations were punctuated by shouts and speculative murmurs. The man seemed unconcerned, strolling through the shops as if he had all the time in the world. He even stopped to inspect a drone in an electronics store, his expression inscrutable behind reflective lenses. Meanwhile, in the mall's main office, John Whitaker, the manager, was wrapping up a quick meeting with his staff. Known for his dedication to maintaining the mall's family-friendly image, John was meticulous about enforcing the rules. One of those rules? No political demonstrations of any kind, especially in such a public space. A knock interrupted their meeting. It was Nancy, one of the security supervisors. "John, would you mind stepping out of here?" she said, sounding more excited than usual. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" John asked, already getting up from his chair. Nancy hesitated. "Well, Elon Musk is here, or someone who looks like him, and he's wearing a MAGA hat." John laughed. "You're kidding." "I wish it was." John smiled, picking up his radio. "All right, let's get this over with quickly." By the time John reached the main floor, a small crowd had already formed. People were reaching out and shouting to each other, their phones capturing every second. He had arrived at a bookstore, where he was now leafing through a book on artificial intelligence, ironically called The Future We Build. John approached, his shiny shoes clicking against the tile floor. "Excuse me, sir," John began, keeping his tone firm but polite. "Can I talk to you?" The man turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses. His face, if not Elon Musk's, bore a striking resemblance. The crowd fell silent. "Yes?" the man said, his voice calm but carrying a subtle authority. John glanced briefly at his hat. "I'm going to have to ask you to take off your hat or leave the premises. We have a strict policy about maintaining a neutral environment here." The man raised an eyebrow, as if mildly amused. "A neutral environment?" he echoed. "Yes, sir. Political attire can be polarizing, and our goal is to keep this mall a space where everyone feels comfortable." The man's lips curved into a slight smile. "Interesting politics," he said, without moving an inch. "But I'm afraid he has no intention of taking off his hat." The murmurs among the spectators increased. A few people began recording the interaction more openly. John could feel the weight of their gazes, their phones capturing every word. "Sir, I'm asking you politely," John said, his voice tight. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to involve security." The man crossed his arms, his red hat reflecting the light above. "Do what you have to do," he said calmly. John's hand hovered over his radio, the tension in the air rising by the second. John's radio crackled as he called for additional security. By now, the situation had drawn a sizable crowd. Mothers with strollers stopped, teenagers leaned over the handrails on the second floor, and even the pretzel vendor abandoned his cart to get a closer look. It seemed like everyone in the mall had their phones out, live streaming or taking photos. Within moments, 2 uniformed security guards arrived. One of them, a tall, burly man named Eric, took his place next to John, arms crossed. The other, a younger guard named Mia, looked uncomfortable as her eyes darted back and forth between John and the man in the red hat. The man remained still, calm and composed. He didn't move or stir. He simply waited, his expression unreadable but faintly amused. "Sir," John repeated now with more authority, "this is your final warning. Take off your hat or leave the mall." The man looked at the guards, then back at John. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice firm, his tone almost defiant. Then we'll have to escort you out, Eric interjected, stepping forward. Escort me out for wearing a hat, the man said, his eyebrows raised. He laughed lightly, shaking his head. Are you guys listening to each other? The crowd began to murmur louder. A few voices rose above the rest. This is ridiculous. Let him wear the hat, shouted a middle-aged man in a denim jacket. Yeah, he's not hurting anyone, a young woman added, holding her phone up to record. But others had a different view. This is a private place. They can enforce their rules, someone chimed in from the background. It's not about the hat, it's about keeping politics out of public spaces, another interjected. The man took a slow step toward John, his presence commanding but not threatening. Tell me something, Mr. Manager, he said, his voice low enough that John had to lean in slightly to hear. Is this really about the hat? Or is it about who you think I am? John's breath caught for a split second. It was a sharp question, one that hit harder than he expected. He straightened, trying to maintain his composure. That's not personal, sir, John said, his tone clipped. Rules are rules. Rules are rules, the man echoed softly, almost to himself. He took off his sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes that were startlingly familiar. The crowd collectively gasped, as if they were holding their breath. Oh my God, it's him, someone whispered loudly. Elon Musk, a teenage girl shouted, her voice breaking through the din. The man smiled slightly, but neither confirmed nor denied. He simply stood there, letting the moment hang in the air. John felt sweat prickling on the back of his neck. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He wasn't just managing a shopping mall now. He was in the middle of a show that was quickly spiraling out of control. I'm asking you again, John said, his voice cracking slightly. Are you going to take off your hat or leave? The man's smile faded. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, in a tone that was calm but tinged with defiance, he said, No. Eric reached for the man's arm, but the man took a step back, his voice rising just enough to be heard clearly over the crowd. Are you going to force me to leave? Go ahead, let the world see. The crowd erupted, some cheering for him, while others gasped, their phones capturing every second. Some people began shouting for the security guards to back off, while others defended the mall's policy. Mia glanced nervously at John. What do we do now? She whispered. John hesitated, weighing his options. This had become a public relations nightmare. No matter what he did, someone would get angry, and the incident would be all over the media by nightfall. Before he could respond, the man raised his hand, signaling silence. The crowd gradually quieted, their attention glued to him. Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be, the man said, his voice calm but firm. He turned to John. But before you make your decision, perhaps you should hear why I'm here. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity heightened. Even John found himself compelled to listen, despite his growing frustration. All right, John said after a long pause, let's hear it. But if this is some kind of trick, you'll soon understand, the man interrupted, his tone carrying a quiet confidence. The man clasped his hands together and took a deliberate step forward, his voice booming enough to command the attention of everyone nearby. You all think this is about a hat, he began, looking around the crowd, making eye contact with a few onlookers. But it isn't, it never was. The murmuring stopped. The phones remained pointed, recording every word as the crowd swelled even further, spilling into the aisles and nearby stores. Some employees leaned against the counters, fascinated, while others stood in the doors of their stores, captivated. The man turned to John, gesturing slightly. You're just doing your job, enforcing policy, maintaining order, I get it. But sometimes the rules we cling to do more harm than good. Look, John interrupted, his patience wearing thin. I don't know what point you're trying to make, but let me finish, the man said, raising his hand calmly but firmly. The crowd let out a collective ooh at the mild rebuke. John bit back a retort and crossed his arms, waving the man on. The man took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. Imagine this. You see someone walking down the street wearing something you disagree with. Maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a shirt, maybe it's just the way they look. You feel uncomfortable, so you decide they shouldn't be allowed in your space. You tell yourself it's about principle, about protecting others from discomfort. But really it's about fear. Fear of what they represent, fear of what you don't understand. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Some people nodded subtly, while others shifted uncomfortably. The tension was palpable. A voice from the crowd suddenly cut through the silence. But why the hat? Why here? It was a young woman in a striped sweater, her phone still pointed directly at the man. He smiled slightly, acknowledging the question. Good question. I'll get to that. But first, he turned back to John. Tell me something, Mr. Manager. What do you think people are really afraid of when they see this hat? John hesitated, taken aback. It's not about fear, he said, choosing his words carefully. It's about keeping this mall neutral, like I said. Politics have no place here. The man raised an eyebrow. Neutrality? Huh? Interesting concept. But neutrality isn't silence, it's action. It's letting people coexist, even when it's uncomfortable. The crowd murmured again, the volume rising. A few people applauded softly, though most were still unsure of where the man was going with his point. Social media comments began flooding the live streams, with opinions ranging from outrage to admiration. Nancy, the security supervisor, approached John discreetly. We're trending on Twitter, she whispered, holding up her phone. The hashtag #MAGAThemal, was gaining traction with thousands of views across multiple live streams. This is getting out of hand, John muttered, rubbing his temples. I can't just let this go. The man, apparently reading John's frustration, stepped forward again. Let's get one thing straight, he said, addressing the entire crowd. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here for a reason. And yes, this hat is part of that reason, but it's not the reason you think. The murmurs grew louder, curiosity overcoming skepticism. Even John found himself leaning slightly against his better judgment. Why are you here? Someone shouted from the back. What's the big deal? The man smiled slightly, but his eyes betrayed a hint of something deeper, something heavier. I'll tell you, he said, but first let me ask you this. What would you do if everything you thought you knew about someone changed in an instant? Would you listen? Or would you shut them out because of what they were wearing? The question hung, the weight of it pressing down on the crowd. Some people looked away, uncomfortable, while others leaned forward, eager for the answer. John opened his mouth to respond. But before he could speak, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up, his expression solemn. This, he said, unfolding it slowly, is why I am here. The crowd surged forward, trying to get a better look. Their phones zoomed in, capturing every detail of the document in their hands. John's stomach clenched as he squinted at the paper, trying to make out the words. What's this? Someone shouted. The man's expression softened, and his voice dropped slightly, forcing everyone to lean in. It's a letter, he said, from a young woman who works here. She wrote to me asking for help, and that's exactly why I've come. The crowd erupted in whispers, their curiosity reaching a fever pitch. A letter? From someone at the mall? The idea seemed almost absurd. People exchanged confused glances as they still held their phones, anxious not to waste a second. John stepped forward, arms crossed defensively. A letter? What does that have to do with you, or this situation? The man unfolded the paper completely, glancing at it briefly before looking up at the onlookers. His tone softened, carrying a weight of sincerity. This letter is from a young woman named Kaylee, he said. She is 21 years old, works in the food court, and dreams of going to college one day. A shiver ran through the crowd. In the back, a girl in a green apron, holding a tray of napkins, froze. Her face paled as she recognized her name. Oh, no, she whispered, her hands shaking. She wrote to me, the man continued, because her mother's medical bills are crushing her family. She's been working 2 jobs just to help keep the lights on. And despite everything she's been through, she's still trying to save enough for community college. The energy in the crowd has shifted. The tension of confrontation has given way to something deeper, empathy. Even John felt the knot in his stomach loosen, replaced by a flash of unease. But what does that have to do with you? John asked, his voice lower now. Why would she write to you? The man smiled slightly, his eyes meeting John's directly. Because she believed I could help, he said simply. He held up the letter again, gesturing toward the crowd. Kaylee didn't send this to just anyone. She sent me, Elon Musk. And for the record, yes, that is exactly who I am. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people gasped audibly, while others screamed in disbelief. Their phones zoomed in on his face, comparing his features to the man they had seen on countless news programs. One teenager exclaimed, "I told you that was him," while another muttered, "No way, this is insane." Even John, usually unfazed, found himself reeling. He stared at the man, now undeniably Elon Musk, struggling to process what was happening. "Wait, what?" Musk laughed softly, shaking his head. "You didn't believe me before, and I understand. This isn't exactly a typical day at the mall." He turned back to the crowd, his voice growing firmer. "Kaylee's letter touched me. She didn't ask for money. In fact, she just asked for advice. Advice on how to balance her dreams with the weight of her family's struggles. She thought maybe I could give her some guidance." Kaylee, still frozen in the back, tried to hide behind the soda machine. But the crowd had already spotted her. Several people turned to her, pointing and whispering. Her face burned with embarrassment. "Kaylee," Musk called gently, his eyes sweeping the crowd until they landed on her. "You don't have to hide. Come here." She hesitated, her heart pounding. Her co-workers nudged her forward, whispering encouragement. Finally, with trembling hands, she stepped into the clearing, her green apron still tied around her waist. The crowd parted to let her pass. Musk smiled warmly, handing her the letter. "You were brave to write that," he said. "And you were right. I want to help." Kaylee stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you actually read it?" She stammered. "I didn't think anyone would do that." "I read it," Musk said firmly. "And I came here today because I wanted to meet you in person." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the moment hit her. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you care about someone like me?" Musk put his hand on her shoulder, his voice full of conviction. "Because people like you are the reason I do what I do. You are the future, and you deserve a chance to build something amazing." The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping their eyes as they watched the emotional exchange. Even John found himself clapping hesitantly, caught up in the moment despite his earlier frustration. Kaylee wiped away tears, her voice shaking. "But I don't know what to do next. I'm just trying to survive." Musk smiled, his gaze steady. "Let's start with this." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small envelope. "This is for you. Consider it an investment in your future." Kaylee took the envelope with shaking hands, opening it cautiously. Inside was a check. She gasped audibly, covering her mouth as her eyes scanned the number. The crowd leaned in, eager to know what it said. Kaylee's voice broke as she whispered, "That's $50,000. The applause erupted again, louder this time. People cheered and whistled, their earlier tensions forgotten in the wake of the heartfelt gesture. The mall echoed with cheers and applause, a stark contrast to the tense standoff of moments before. Kaylee stood in stunned silence, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. Her co-workers rushed to her side, patting her on the back and offering congratulations. The crowd buzzed with energy, all eager to capture this once-in-a-lifetime event on their phones. John stepped forward cautiously, his professionalism at war with the humanity of the moment. "Mr. Musk," he began, his voice lower now. I didn't know about this situation." "If you knew?" Musk turned to him, his expression calm but firm. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," he said, his tone sharp enough to make John wince. "You saw a hat and made a judgment. I get it, rules are rules. But sometimes, the rules need to bend for the right reasons." John nodded, shame washing over him as the weight of Musk's words set in. "You're right," he admitted. "I was too focused on implementing policies to see the big picture." "I'm sorry." Musk's face softened, and he offered a small wave. "Apology accepted. Just remember, people are more than what they wear or the opinions they have. Sometimes it's worth taking a moment to understand the person behind the appearance." The crowd murmured in agreement, a few people nodding thoughtfully. Musk turned back to Kaylee, his smile returning. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Use this opportunity to pursue your dreams. And when you are in a position to help someone else, pay it forward. Kaylee wiped away her tears, her voice shaking as she replied, I will, I promise. As the crowd began to disperse, the energy shifted again. The event had been recorded, shared, and discussed in real time, causing waves across social media platforms. News networks quickly picked up the story, framing it as an unexpected act of kindness from one of the world's most recognizable figures. Back in his office, John scrolled through Twitter, his face pale as he read the comments. Most praised Musk for his gesture and Kaylee for her courage. But a fair share criticized John's actions, accusing him of excess and bias. He sighed, feeling the sting of public opinion. However, amidst the negativity, one comment stood out. Sometimes we all need to be reminded to see the humanity in each other. Lessons learned today, let's do better. That night, Kaylee sat at the kitchen table, the check still in her hands. Her mother, frail but smiling, reached out to squeeze her daughter's hand. You've always been a fighter, she said, and now you have the chance to do something amazing. Kaylee nodded, her determination growing. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope, real, tangible hope. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's departure from the mall was as low-key as his arrival. He declined interviews, waved politely to fans, and slipped away without further fanfare. But his actions left a lasting impact, not just on Kaylee, but on everyone who witnessed the day's events. The following morning, Oakwood Plaza management issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to review its policies to ensure a more inclusive environment. John himself pinned the statement, vowing to approach his role with more compassion and understanding in the future. The story went viral, sparking conversations across the country about judgment, compassion, and the power of small acts of kindness. Kaylee's story inspired others to share their struggles, leading to an outpouring of support and community outreach. Ultimately, what began as a confrontation over a hat turned into something much bigger, a reminder of the humanity that connects us all, even in the most unexpected places. If you like this video and it added something to you, watch the next one. The next video will add more value to you. Don't forget to like it, your comment is very important, subscribe to the channel, recommend this video to a friend and watch the next video.